Hello, in the previous videos we have modeled the structure and behavior of the Arbiter case study. A small portion of the behavior was left and we will try to cover that portion of the behavior in this video. So in this video we will be modeling that when the system is in idle 2 state or idle 1 state or idle 3 state, it can go to any of these master states, either master 1, master 2 or master 3, depending upon the request from the masters in the priority encoded fashion. Now the priority is basically in such a way that when the system is in idle 1 state here, then the order of priority will be, it will basically look for a request from master 1, master 2 and master 3. If all these master will request for using the bus, then it will first allow from idle 1 state, it will first allow master 2 to use the bus and then master 3 and in the last master 1. And now if the system is in idle 2 state, then it will look for a request from the masters and it will first allow master 3, then master 1 and then master 2. Similarly, if the system is in idle 3 state, it will look for a request from the masters and it will allow the masters in the priority fashion. That is, first it will allow master 1 to use the bus and secondly master 2, it will allow master 2 to use the bus and then in the last master 3. So we have to use the decision node that when the system is in idle 2 state, it can go to any of these master state, depending upon the request. Okay, so now we have to use the decision node. To use the decision node, go to the node section of the palette here. Here is the choice pseudo state. Just drag and drop it onto the state machine. Then it will ask you for the name of this choice pseudo state. I do not want to use any name, so delete. Okay. Now I need a transition from idle 2 state to decision node here. So for the transition, go to the edges section of the palette here, select the transition and from idle 2 to choice pseudo state. Now from the choice, it can go to either master 2 state or master 1 state or master 3 state depending upon the request. Whichever master request to use the bus, it will go to that state. And only if all 3 master requests for the use of bus, then it will first allow master 2 to use the bus, then master 3 and then master 1. So we need 3 transitions. So to add transition, go to this section. Here is the transition from basically decision node to master 2. Okay, now this transition has a condition that whenever there is a request from master 1 and master 2, it will allow master 2 to use the bus. So I have already said that this is the priority encoded fashion to allow the masters to use the bus. So if master 1 and master 2 requests, then it will allow master 2 to use the bus. So this transition will be triggered on request 1 and request 2 ports. So to trigger it on that request 1 and request 2, select this transition, go to UML tab of the properties, scroll down, click this button, then to add ports, click this button. Now we need to trigger it on request 1 and request 2. So browse for request 1 and request 2. Here is request 1, click this button. Now we need another port, that is request 2. Select this one and then this button and OK. Now these two ports will basically here in the port section, which means that this transition will trigger on request 1 and request 2. But the condition is that request 2 should be false. So to add that condition, go to the UML tab of the properties, then here is the guard condition, and then click this button. Here is the constraint. It will then ask you for the constraint element and the specification. So the constraint element here would be the request 2 because the condition is on request 2. To add a constraint element, click this button, browse for the ports. So we need request 2, which should be false for this transition. Okay, and the specification would be literal boolean false. So click this button, then select literal boolean and false. Then okay. Now we need another transition that will be from decision node to master 1. So to add a transition, here is a transition, then this decision node, and then this master 1. Decision node to master 1. Okay. Now this transition will be triggered on request 1 and request 3 ports. That when the system, when both master 1 and master 3 requests to use the bus, then it will allow master 1 to use the bus first, or in other words, the system will give priority to master 1. So we have to trigger this transition on request 1 and request 3 ports. So select this transition, go to UML section of the properties, scroll down, here is the trigger section, click this button to add trigger. Then the new window will be opened, which will ask you for the creation of new trigger. So we need to trigger this transition on request 1 and request 3 port. To add ports, click this button here and browse for request 1 and request 3. Here is request 1, then this button, and here is request 3, then this button, and OK. And OK. But the condition is that request 1 should be false. So the guard condition here would be that click this button, then constraint. It will then ask you for the constraint element and specification. The constraint element would be request 1 because the condition is there on request 1. So to add constraint element, click this button, browse for request 1. Here, click this button and OK. Now the specification would be literal boolean and false. OK and OK. So now we need another transition which will be from decision node to master 3. So to add transition, go to the node section of edges section of the palette, select transition, and from decision node to master 3. Okay. Now here okay. Now this transition will be triggered on request 3, that when there is a request from master 3, it will allow it to use the master 3, to use the bus. So this transition will be triggered on request 3 port. So to trigger it on request 3, go to the UML section of the properties, then click this button of the trigger, then to add port, click this button, and then browse for request 3. Here it is, then forward arrow button and OK. And the condition on the request 3 port will be that request 3 should be false. So to add a condition, select this transition, and then to add guard, click this plus button of the guard, then add constraint, and then constraint element would be request 3, of course, because there is a condition on request 3. So click this button to add constraint element, then browse for request 3. Okay, and then this button, and okay. Specification would be literal boolean false. Okay. Okay, now this is done. Now the same will be the case for idle 2 and idle 3, that from idle 2 the system can go to either of these master states. So we need another decision node here. To add decision node, go to the node section of the palette. Here is choice pseudo state. Just drag and drop it onto the palette, onto the state machine, and then I do not want any name. Okay. Now we need a transition from idle 1 state to this choice pseudo state. To add a transition, here is a transition, select the transition, and from idle 1 state to choice pseudo state. Now from choice pseudo state we can go to master 1 state. Here is a transition from choice pseudo state to master 1 state, and the condition on this transition would be that whenever there is because this basically this transition would be triggered on request 1, request 2, and request 3 ports, but the condition would be on request 1, that should be false at that time. Okay, so to add trigger on this transition, go to the UML tab of the properties, scroll down. Here is the trigger section. Click this button to add trigger, and then to add ports, click this button and browse for request 1, 2, and 3. Here is request 1, then click this button, request 2, then this button, request 3, and this button, and okay. Now all 3 ports are shown here in the port section, which means that this transition will be triggered on these 3 ports. Okay, but the condition that must satisfy in order to transition from the idle 1 state to master 1 state, that is request 1 should be false. So to add a constraint, go to this guard section, then plus button, then constraint. The constraint element would be request 1, of course, because the condition is on request 1. So to add a constraint element, click this plus button, browse for request 1. Here it is. Okay, and the specification would be literal boolean false. Okay. So now we need another condition. We need another transition that will be from idle 1 to master 3. So to add a transition, here is a transition from decision to master 3. From decision to master 3. Now this transition would be triggered on request 2 and request 3 ports. So to add a trigger, select this transition, go to UML section of the properties, go to the trigger section. To add a trigger, click this button, and then to add ports in the trigger, click this button and browse for the ports you want this transition to trigger on. We need request 2 and request 3. So request 2 is here, then this button, and request 3, then this button. Okay, and okay, so the trigger has been created, and the guard condition is that request 3 should be false at that time. So to add a guard condition, click this button, then constraint. The constraint element would be request 3, of course. So click this button, then request 3, then forward arrow button and OK. The specification would be literal boolean false. OK. Now we need another transition from this decision node to master 2 state. So for transition, here is the transition. Select this transition from the palette from decision node to master 2 state. Okay. Now you can also basically resize this, not resize but reposition this transition to visualize better. And this one and this one. Okay. Now this transition from idle 1 to master 2 will be triggered on request 2 port, that whenever there is a request from master 2, the transition will be triggered. UML section of the properties, go to UML section of the properties to add trigger. Then to add trigger, scroll down, then to add trigger, click this plus button, and then to add ports in the trigger, click this button. We only need request 2. So request 2, then this button and OK. Now the condition is that request 2 should be false. Now to add a constraint, click this button and constraint element would be request 3, of course, request 3, then this button, OK, and the specification would be literal boolean false. OK and OK. Now we need another transition, another decision node from idle 3, because we can go to either of these master states from idle 3 as well. So to add a decision node, go to this section of the palette, choice pseudo state. Here I do not want to use any name for this state, so delete this one. Now we need transition from idle 3 to decision node. Okay, now the outgoing transition can be would be from this decision node to master 3, master 1 and master 2. So we need a transition. Here is the transition and is from choice pseudo state to master 3. So okay, now this transition would be triggered on request 2 and request 3 port, and the condition would be request 3 should be false. Now to add trigger, select this transition, go to UML section of the properties, and then this button to add trigger. Then to add ports in the trigger, click this button, and we need request 2 and 3 ports. Request 2 and request 3 ports. In this window, the recent selections are shown because we have recently selected request 1, request 2 and request 3, and all these transitions will be occurred on request 1, request 2 and request 3 ports. So we can select it from here as well instead of browsing it in the model. So click OK. Request 2 and request 3 are here in the trigger. OK, the trigger has been created. Now the condition is that request 3 should be false. Okay, now to add trigger, click this button, then constraint, and then it will ask you for the constraint element. The constraint element here would be request 3, of course, because the condition is there on request 3 port. So to add constraint element, click this button, then request 3, click this button and OK. Now the specification would be, of course, literal boolean and is false. OK and OK. Now we need another transition which will be from this decision node to master 1, and this transition would be triggered on request 1 port. So to add transition, select from the palette from decision node to master 1. Okay, now this transition would be triggered on request 1 port only. So to trigger it on request 1 port, go to UML section of properties, then in the trigger section click this button, then it will ask you for the ports on which you want to trigger this transition. Then click this button and then browse for request 1. Here is the request 1 and then this button. Okay. Now the condition is on request 1 that should be false. So to add a condition, select this transition, go to UML section of properties, and then in the guard click this button and add constraint. The constraint element of course would be request 1. So request 1. Okay. And the specification would be literal boolean and false, of course. Okay. Now we need another transition. First, a bit resize your state machine a bit. Okay. Now we need another transition that will be from this decision node to master 2 state. And that transition would be triggered on request 1 and request 2 port, and the condition would be that request 2 should be false at that time. So we need a transition. So to add transition, select transition from the palette here, from decision node to this master 2 state. Now you can basically okay. Okay, now we have to trigger this transition on request 1 and request 2 port. So to add a trigger, click this transition, select this transition, go to UML section of the properties, and in the trigger section, click this button and add ports, which will be request 1 and request 2. So to add ports, click this button, then request 1 and request 2. And okay. Then okay. Now the condition would be that request 2 should be false at that time. So to add a condition, select this transition which has been already selected. Go to UML section of the properties, then guard, click this button and add a constraint only. The constraint element would be request 2, of course, because there is a condition on request 2 only. So click this button, then request 2. Okay, and the condition would be literal boolean and false, of course. Okay. Now we have modeled the behavior, almost modeled the behavior. Just one thing is left, that whenever the system is in master 2 state, the grant 2 signal should be high, and whenever the system is in master 1 state, the grant 1 should be high. And then whenever system is in master 3 state here, then the grant 3 should be high. So to do this, select this master 2 state. Now in this state, grant 2 should be high. So select this state, go to UML section of properties, and here is the do activity section. Here it is. Now this is basically the activity or action or behavior which the system performs as long as the system is in that respective state. So now we have to add the condition that whenever the system is in master 2 state, the grant 2 should be high. So select this master state, go to UML section of the properties, then do activity, and then click this plus button. It will then ask you for different options. So we need opaque behavior. Select opaque behavior. For that, a new window will come up at creation of new opaque behavior. Then you have to select the language for your opaque behavior. So to select the language, click this button, a new window will come up. You can select any of these language. I'm selecting natural language. Then click this forward button and OK. The natural language has been selected and its editor is opened. Now I want this opaque behavior to basically that grant 2 should be high, or in other words grant 2 should be true, and OK. Now the opaque behavior for your activity has been added. You can see it inside the state. Similarly for master 1, the same procedure will be followed, but the grant 1 should be true in this case. So select this state, go to the UML section of the properties, then do activity, and then click this button, and then opaque behavior, and then you have to select the language from here, then natural language, OK, and OK. Now here grant 1 should be high, OK, and OK. Similarly for master 3, the same procedure would be followed. Select master 3 state, go to UML section, then do activity, click this button and opaque behavior, then set language for your opaque behavior, and then natural language, this, and then this, and this time grant 3 should be high, and OK, sorry, OK. Okay, now the behavior for the Arbiter case study has been completed. Thank you so much.